This is the first thing. The second thing is that the early Muhaddithun used the term al-Hasan. It's not that they never used the term. They 100% used the term. But they didn't use the term in the exact meaning that we're going to study right now, which is mentioned by al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, where he follows al-Imam ibn Salah. Like, what is the meaning, or in what sense would they use it? We can say that in a generic sense, we can categorize the term Hasan as used by them in two main categories. At-Tahsin al-Ihtijaji, and number two will be At-Tahsin al-I'jabi. At-Tahsin al-I'jabi versus At-Tahsin al-Ihtijaji. At-Tahsin al-Ihtijaji is when they would use the term Hasan for the purpose of referring to the hadith as something that they could use as a proof. Okay, from this category, they have different ways of using the term Hasan. This is amongst the mutaqaddimun. So number one, إطلاق الحسن على الحديث الصحيح. Sometimes they would really just be talking about a hadith sahih, but they would use the term Hasan. They would say هذا hadith Hasan. And really what they're trying to say is حديث مقبول يحتج به, which is, according to the later scholars, that would be called a hadith sahih. But they would use the term Hasan to refer to that. That has occurred in the kalam of the earlier scholars, such as Ali ibn al-Madini and Imam Ahmad and Imam Bukhari and Yaqub ibn Shaybah and al-Bazzar and al-Daraqutni and al-Bayhaqi and al-Tahawi and Ibn Abd al-Barr and Ibn Hazm. Sometimes they would use the term Hasan, and they're using it to refer to ما يرويه الراوي المختلف فيه الذي ليس فيه جرح مفسر. There's a narrator regarding whom there are differences. Some scholars are willing to accept and some scholars are more cautious. But we don't find any scholar that has done jarh mufassar, a detailed qadah, ta'an upon that rawi. So Ibn al-Qattan al-Fasi, this is how he uses the term al-Hasan. And هذا الراوي حسن or هذا حديث حسن. What's he referring to is that there is a narrator where there's khilaf, but the jarh is not mufassar, it's not detailed, it's not strong. Sometimes they use the term Hasan, and they're referring to a hadith where we say that the narrator, his dabt, his memorization, his retainment, is not at the level of the greatest scholars that we mentioned before, but it's slightly beneath that, but it's acceptable. In the later istilah, the istilah of the mutaakhirin, this is called al-Hasan li-dhatihi. This is called al-Hasan li-dhatihi. So they can use the term Hasan, for example, in this meaning as well. And the ones that have done this, the likes of Bazzar, Ibn Shaheen, al-Daraqutni, Ibn Abd al-Barr. Sometimes they use the term Hasan and they're referring to al-Hadith الذي فيه ضعف محتمل عند بعض النقاد. Meaning it has weakness, but it's a weakness which is muhtamal. It can be raised, it can be removed. The hadith can be elevated to a stronger degree. The likes who have used this, Ali ibn al-Madini and al-Bazzar and Ibn Shaheen al-Bayhaqi and others. And sometimes they use the term Hasan to refer to a hadith which is actually weak, but because of the number of narrations that have supported that hadith, they feel like it can be accepted and used still. And this is, according to later scholars, they use the term al-Hasan li ghayrihi over here. Imam Tirmidhi uses al-Hasan in this meaning. So this is how they would, all of them are using the term Hasan, and it's all for the purpose of ihtijaj or to do hukum upon the hadith. But even then, it's not necessarily in line with only the mustalah, the terminology of the later scholars that we're going to study. There are other terminologies that they're using as well. Another thing they would do is that they would use tahseen not from a mustalah perspective to begin with, rather from a linguistic perspective. Something in the hadith is causing it to be, very interesting. Something about the hadith is gaining our attention, attracting our attention. There's a maziyah, there's something interesting. And from this perspective, they could actually use the term Hasan to refer to a hadith which is gharib. We mentioned gharib is the one which is fard. There's only one narrator that narrates it. And they use the term Hasan to refer to it. Okay. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, he says, the qawl of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, كانوا يكرهون إذا اجتمعوا أن يخرج الرجل أحسن حديثه أو أحسن ما عنده. What is intended when Ibrahim al-Nakha'i says they would dislike when they gathered that the person mentioned أحسن حديثه أو أحسن ما عنده. He did تعليق by saying عنا إبراهيم بالأحسن الغريب. الغريب. Why are they calling this أحسن ما عند الراوي? Look, hadith, it went to a point where it becomes like kind of like a collective item, right? Where you're collecting, and there are certain, like just like cards, for example, there are certain cards that are well found amongst everyone, and there are certain cards that are not found anywhere. They're very rare. So if you have a card which is extremely rare, for example, that card is worth more. That's how they used to think of al-gharaib as well. And initially in talab, so some students, for example, might think that, oh, if I have certain hadith no one else has, that's going to attract students for me, and they're going to come to me and take my narrations. So they gather ahadith, they try and gather ahadith, even though, like we said, most likely the gharaib are problematic, meaning they're not really authentic. But the fact that nobody else has them and I'm able to grab them, it becomes like a collector's item, right? So they're running after these narrations that are gharaib, that others don't have but they have, or they're able to collect them. The problem is though, if a rawi has a lot of gharaib, and there are ahadith that you're only finding with that rawi, that could eventually raise a question mark, and people could eventually be like, okay, this guy's problematic. Even if you genuinely would just gather gharaib. So let's say there's a narrator that genuinely goes and he finds gharaib and he looks for them and he's able to narrate them, or he grabs them and he gathers them. But when he narrates them to his students, it is very likely that some of his students might use this as a means of questioning his dhabt. Because why does he have all these gharaib? Like we said, it's not the norm that only one person is able to narrate a number of narrations. The norm is that there should be more that are well aware and well versed with the mashahir, the narrations of the mashahir. So that's why Ibrahim al-Nakha'i says they used to dislike if he was bringing narrations that no one else had. They were like, okay, where'd you get this from? And this could potentially lead to raising a question mark regarding the dhabt of that rawi, the one who's narrating it to begin with. So he says, لأن الغريب غير المألوف يستحسن أكثر من المشهور المعروف. Like a collector's item. If you have something that nobody has, and you're the only one who has it, okay, it's something which is, people look forward to that. They want something which is rare that nobody else has. And they boast about it. So the Muhadditheen would use this ibara, would use the term Hasan to refer to these types of ahadith. He says, وأصحاب الحديث يعبرون عن المناكير بهذه العبارة. ولهذا قال شعبة بن الحجاج لما قيل له ما لك لا تروي عن عبد الملك بن أبي سليمان وهو حسن الحديث. And Shu'bah bin Hajjaj, he was asked, why don't you narrate from Abdul Malik bin Abi Sulaiman, even though he is Hasan al-Hadith? فقال من حسنها فررت. He said, I ran from its husn, and from the fact that he has all these narrations nobody else has. That's what makes me not narrate from him. And then there's another thing, Ahbab. Let's say there's a rawi who's classified as weak. If you narrate a lot from that rawi, that raises a question mark upon you as well, as a narrator. That you're willing to take narrations of weak ruwat, weak narrators, and pass them forward. So initially, how gharaib might have been something which was marghoob fi. People might think, for example, that if I have something rare nobody else has, that's something beautiful, that's something nice. But eventually, it actually leads to questioning the dhabt of that narrator. And it also leads to other narrators other students not willing to then later on go to this teacher who has a bunch of gharaib and take even the normally accepted hadith of his. Why? Because if that teacher ends up being classified as weak, then why are these students will also be classified with a question mark? Why? Because they're going to a teacher and willing to narrate from weak narrators. So for example, they mention this as a praise regarding certain narrators, that they're only narrating from people that are thiqat. That's a praise for that rawi. And on the other hand, when they say fulan narrates from thiqat and ghayr thiqat, he's willing to narrate from everyone, that is almost like a slight ta'an upon that rawi. Not direct ta'an, but the fact that he doesn't care, he's willing to narrate from anyone. So they would actually run away from gharaib. And the ones who used al-husn in this ma'na, meaning al-hadith al-gharib, are the likes of Imam Ahmad as well and Abu Hatim as well. Sometimes al-hasan is used upon as-sanad al-ali. Why? Because again, that's a maziyah. That is something special about that narration. al-isnad al-ali. So they use the term al-Hasan. Or sometimes the narration, the matan, has a very beautiful meaning. Nothing to do with the sanad at all. The meaning that's being mentioned in the hadith is a very beautiful, a very amazing meaning that's being portrayed. So they would use the term, they would say, هذا hadith Hasan. And it's a very nice narration. Such a beautiful narration. Sometimes they would use the term Hasan to indicate upon a narration that has within it a fa'ida, a benefit either in the isnad or the matan. For example, Al-Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala said regarding a narration that was narrated as marfu', even though, according to him, the riwayah is mursal. It's not actually marfu'. When he heard the riwayah which was muttasil, yani according to him, the one he had was a riwayah al-mursal, the mursal version of that narration. When he was able to attain a chain which actually had the narration in the muttasil version, he's like, this is nice. And I was able to get what I was looking for. This is nice. So use the term Hasan. Likewise, Abu Hatim al-Razi, for example, uses the term Hasan in this regard as well. So the term Hasan, if we look at the earliest usage amongst the Muhadditheen, it was used in a varying amount of different meanings. Some of them are overlapping with the term as was accepted and understood by the later Muhadditheen, but many of these meanings are actually not overlapping without those terms, and they're completely separate terms. Some of them don't have to do with the sanad at all to begin with, and some of them can actually indicate upon da'if that are actually questionable, maybe even da'if, like the gharaib, and so on and so forth, as we mentioned. For more detail regarding this, you can look at the dirasa of Dr. Khalid al-Durais. He has a dirasa, very beautiful dirasa, quite long. It's called Al-Hadith al-Hasan lidatihi wa lighayrihi, dirasa istiqra'iyya, where he tries to gather not only this discussion regarding Al-Hadith al-Hasan, but in general the concept of Al-Husn or Al-Hasan in Al-Hadith from the early times all the way till what was mentioned later on in the books. And it is a beautiful dirasa. طيب. Now we go to the actual definition of Al-Hadith al-Hasan. What is Al-Hadith al-Hasan?